Hello and welcome to OLM Issue Triage. Today is Thursday, May 26th. Today we're going to be looking at some outstanding issues on some of the newer OLM API repositories. Let's start off with taking a look at Rollbacks. I think there's been quite a bit of activity going on in Rollbacks, so let's see where we're at the moment. Maybe to begin, we can take a look at what's going on in the current milestone and see what we have scoped and how much time we have left. I think 0.5, I'm not sure if we have a particular due date for that, but we've been trying to cut Rollback releases roughly every 3 weeks. So I think that this one may be, we may only have about another week left before we try to cut 0.5. So we can go ahead and look at some of the open issues in 0.5. So the first one, support referencing and mounting local bundle content. I think this is something that we did want to prioritize. And we touched upon it briefly this morning. Basically, the idea is to, right, as it says, provide a reference to potentially a config map or a local volume and be able to create a bundle resource from that local resource. I don't know whether this is still something that we are considering for 0.5 at this point. I don't know, Tim, do you think that maybe we should move this back?
Yeah, I don't know if this is going to take more than a week potentially. So I think what would take the most time is like churning through design, getting consensus, and then implementing this. But I think someone could probably hack up something that works using the plain provisioner, and it shouldn't take more than a couple of days of work. So yeah, I guess I didn't directly answer your question. We can move this back if we want. I still think this is valuable, at least when we start looking at DEPI, and certainly it's really nice for dev workflows if you want to have like kubectl plugins that basically create config maps under the hood. I just basically point at like a manifest directory locally and plugin handles the rest, but it's nothing on the critical path right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's good for developer workflows. Can we talk a bit about how does it integrate with DEPI at all, or it's just useful for testing in general, regardless of whether it's
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think it depends on how we source catalog content for DEPI. So I don't know if Nick might be on the call, Nick or Joe, you guys might have a better rein in on that component, but I think what I've seen from the strawman is we just have this low-level file-based catalog, JSON blob, put in config map, source content from there, etc.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Sorry, Tim, could you ask the question that you had for me or Nick again? I was looking at something else temporarily.
Yeah, I don't know, Nick, if you heard that either, but I was basically saying that it's just an open question. I think I saw in the strawman one way of sourcing catalog content, like file-based catalog content, was basically a JSON blob of here's a low-level file-based catalog. And we'll throw in a config map. Maybe that's something DEPI outputs, and we can have a provisioner that sources bundle content from that config map.
Why is this any different than, I'm not quite sure like why this would be any different from how any other bundle gets sourced to the cluster. I mean, like you could consider a new type of bundle or whatever that just contains a bunch of, like a blob, like all you need is a blob. It doesn't even need to be the same interfaces. It can literally be stored anywhere. I'm not sure if this is something to be like tackled here in Ruckpack land.
Is this just a, it would be nice if there was another source type in Ruckpack called config map?
Yeah, I guess something else I realized is like we'll eventually need some sort of disconnected story. And maybe this helps bridge the gap. I mean, certainly that's super in the future, or hopefully it might be in the future. It's unclear right now. So if it's not needed as like a building block for DEPI, then maybe the value prop of, or rather the investment value here isn't all that substantial.
I mean, I think, I don't know, it's kind of like we're putting the, this is a problem to solve as we're working with DEPI. So as we build up DEPI, on that side, we can say, I need to source DEPI content to a cluster. And I think it would be more clear, at least to me, what all of the like unknowns are there, instead of trying to build something in Ruckpack ahead of time to handle like the sourcing that stuff onto the cluster. Does that make sense? It just seems like this is the wrong order of operations.
Yeah, it depends. So I think I'm still convinced that this is really nice for dev workflows. For those familiar with like the Magic Catalog, like I don't have to go push a container image. I can just create a gRPC service, and the catalog content is mounted by a config map, right? So I still think this is valuable from the like kubectl plugin perspective, like Opera SDK run bundle. But certainly can understand the perspective of order of operations for components that actually matter, right?
So, I mean, like, why is DEPI resolve set coming in here? Like, where is DEPI coming in? Because like, if we built this now, something for sourcing catalog content to the cluster, then what's going to use it?
This is where I'm getting hung up. It seems to me like we're not, like this maybe as an example that says class is DEPI, like maybe that's irrelevant for what we're talking about here. To me, it seems like we want to have some content that rather than loading it from a Git repo or an image, like we just allow Ruckpack to go read a config map to load it that way. And then like, it's up then to the resolver to understand what the contents of that config map are. So if that's what we're talking about doing, like I think that's fairly valuable. I don't think it's like in the critical path of anything we're trying to do upstream, except for maybe the DEPI resolve set stuff, which we're going to figure out. But like maybe that ends up being yet another thing anyway. So I agree with Nick on that point. Like, let's not try to solve that DEPI use case specifically right now, just because we haven't really delved into DEPI at all.
Yeah.
But if we think that like sourcing arbitrary fs.fs stuff from a config map is helpful, then I don't see a reason why not. Like I agree, Tim. Like it seems like there is some value there. I guess it just like in my mind, like where do we fit that on the priority list?
So I think we just back this up then.
I think there's something valuable in what you're talking about, Tim. I think there's a use case that you touched on, which is like iterating. And if like you could refactor this ticket to be like, from like a user perspective, like I want to iterate on a bundle locally without having to build stuff. Like I want to be able to like rapidly develop my bundle locally, I guess, and sort of stamp them out or update them or move it on the cluster without having to build an image or push it to a repository. That might make it more critical.
It almost seems like, so the bundle, the class is a provisioner, right, for the data within the bundle. This other stuff is really about where do you get it and how do you get it, right? So it almost seems like you could have an abstraction for describing how do you pull stuff, right? Where does it come from? Does it come from Git? Does it come from files? Does it come from a mount? Does it come from an image? Almost seems like you need a, I don't know, lack of a better name, a fetcher or something like that. Because this is an interface between that and the provisioner, right?
That's what
Yeah,
the
so
bundle's
Chris,
supposed to be, though.
Right, but from Chris's perspective, Nick, this is probably pretty out of date, the like example and everything. So yeah, that is the bundle will be the right abstraction there, Chris, but there is well, we do need a source content for like a bundle provisioner. So we have actually encoded that kind of logic as an interface in Go code and whatnot. But maybe next steps out here, like Dan, let's move this out of 0.5 definitely. And maybe we add like a needs grooming label, or we can even like edit the comment specifically, because this is an out of date example. It's not even referencing the same bundle API as before. So up to you, what do you want to do with that? But I think we've landed on it might be valuable for quickly getting bundle content on cluster, and maybe not as much useful in terms of providing building blocks for Deppy.
The other thing that we just need to keep in mind, and I'm sure we're all already thinking this, but config map sourcing is constrained by etcd's size limits. So that like necessarily means that it's not going to be great for certain use cases. Like an FB, like you can't really put a file-based catalog inside of a config map unless it's like a stupidly simple file-based catalog.
Or unless you shard your file-based catalog, right, into multiple directories.
Right.
And then you have to have a config map of config maps. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
But if your bundle, like even a single bundle might be bigger than 1 megabyte, right? So at some point, like you're gonna run into that issue depending on what you're trying to do. Like a plain manifest bundle that we've got, like there's no limit to the number of manifests that you put in there. You could have 700 CRDs, and that would be way over a meg, and that would not work with a config map, whereas that would work if you had an image or Git repo. So just something to think about in terms of, you know, what the design for this is. And maybe the design is like, yeah, we're just going to use it and we'll put in the Go doc and the API doc. Like this doesn't work for all use cases because it's constrained by a 1 megabyte etcd limit or whatever.
Yeah, yes, I think if we make it transparent that the backing source is a config map, then there's, you know, less astonishment potentially when it doesn't work. And, but yeah, that's a good call out. We've run into that with OLM quite a bit, using config maps as backing storage. Okay, so this one, I think we've groomed it. I moved it out of 0.5. So this is not something that we expect to deliver, you know, in this coming milestone. So let's go back, take a look at what else we have going on. Define API for bundle adjustability. So Joe, you wrote this issue. I think we've talked about it briefly. I feel like there was quite a bit that was already done around this, but maybe you can give a high-level overview of what this issue was, because there was some confusion around whether we had like fulfilled it or not.
Yeah, the only thing that's not left here is the EDE tests for it. So the code's in, the docs are in, the EDE tests are not. I kind of think like as we're working on this registry v1 provisioner, we can kill two birds with one stone. We're going to have to use this content URL thing as part of that. So I think we can write the EDE test for the registry v1 bundle instance to plain bundle, or vice versa, I guess. But basically, like the EDE test for the registry v1 stuff will cover the EDEs that we need for this. So I think we can basically tie this to that other story and then close them both at the same time when we finish the registry v1 one. Unless both disagree.
So Dan, do we need to, Joe, we don't have a upstream ticket for that registry v1 provisioner, right? Is it worth creating it here and then just copying that intent test as the like AC, and we can just close this out? Or we can just link up some sort of linkage.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
I'll just
Yeah,
do
maybe
that.
that's not a good use.
We don't have to do it here.
Okay, yeah, maybe as you said, Tim, maybe we can close this one and have a follow-up for the end-to-end specifically.
Yeah, Dan, maybe let's just make a comment now and hold off before the ticket's there. Like just waiting on end-to-end test at this point, and we can close it out.
Okay, now with the TDE tests. Okay, I think that's good. Okay, cool. So we'll deliver this for grade 0.5. Great. Yeah, and I think this is, yeah, very cool feature in general. Okay, Artifact Hub IO. We've talked about this today. I don't think that this is something that we're planning to deliver in 0.5. Unless someone disagrees. I think we can move it out of the milestone and maybe potentially put it back in the backlog for now, based on our conversation earlier today.
Yeah, that's fine with me, definitely.
Okay, great. All right, so let's move that to the backlog. Just leave a comment. Great. Okay. BI status. This is one that I actually looked into, and I couldn't quite understand what the exact context was, so I didn't end up making progress on it, and I ended up working on the hash implementation for the bundle name. This is basically that there is, right, like there's a status condition that was from when the bundle and the bundle instances were like two separate units, and now that we have this sort of dynamic bundle concept, it's not entirely clear whether this condition is still valuable, right?
Yeah, this is probably one of those really quick tickets created as follow-ups to the PR. I think this might even be coming from Joe's comment, so Joe might be able to provide some more context, but we still need to iron out the UX for the BI. And maybe this is something this is definitely something we can push back, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I didn't. Sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say that I didn't really have too much thought on this, other than I think this is also in the realm of the conversation that at least Tim and I were having around, like, how do we, like, what does the column output look like for a bundle instance, especially in the case where we're trying to pivot and like maybe the pivot isn't successfully happening or we're in the middle of it. So like, how do we tell a user who's looking at kubectl output, hey, like your bundle is running, but we're also trying to pivot. And so like, we're kind of in this dual state thing where like some old state is true, but we're trying to progress to some new state. So I think the comment I made about getting rid of this condition was kind of related to that larger conversation, just about like, what are the right things to bubble up? And then how do we do that, right? So I think this needs probably like more triage and like thinking and design about like what are the print columns and what are the status fields of the bundle instance. That's kind of what it boils down to.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. Maybe we can oh geez, English is hard. Maybe we can just have like a related to, because I want to say we have that as a milestone ticket, right, Dan? The revisit printer column UX or bundle instance UX. Probably another one of those really quick fire tickets I created as a follow-up, but that seems more important to me than this. Right. It was. I think it was that
Okay.
331.
Okay. Nice. Okay, I'll just put that as one, but I think, yeah, I don't know if this seems like it might not be ready because it's dependent on that one. So I think we can move this out. If that sounds okay.
Yeah, I think this one needs grooming. So push it out. Backlog. That's fine with me.
Cool. Okay. All right. Next up, refactor sourcing Git from Git implementation to use a Git library. Right. So there definitely was some work done on this. Is Aki on the call?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, just right. That just I've been waiting for the debut. This one.
Oh, you've been okay. All right. So that's definitely then something that we should definitely provide some reviews for you on that. But it looks like it's definitely like in progress, right? And you think we can get it in for 0.5?
Yes, its review is done. Yes.
Less reviews. Okay.
Hey,
All right.
Aki,
Well, I think. Yep.
Did you see so we merged something, the source interface stuff that like totally blew up where we do the Git sourcing stuff? I put a comment on your PR that says like, hey, just make
Yeah.
sure. Okay.
Yeah, it's blew up, but I
Yeah.
merged it correctly. So now it's working again.
Okay, great.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Aki. So yeah, so we sounds like we just need to get some more reviews in, and then this is still good for 0.5,
Yeah,
which
I hope
is
so.
great.
Thank you.
Because yeah, the original implementation that I did was definitely kind of hacky. So that's great. Thank you. Okay. So next, add pprof profiling to. Oh, I'm sorry. Revisit the bundle instance API's UX after the latest API overhaul. Right. This goes into the conversation about the printer columns.
Yeah, I've been taking a look at this. I think it might be good to come to some sort of consensus about how we want this to look. I think Tim and I were talking about it a bit, where we might go with a numeric approach for kind of similar to how deployments work now, where it is available. And it's so the main issue is that when a bundle pivots, so say that a bundle was installed and it succeeded, when it pivots to a failed bundle, it doesn't indicate, the bundle instance doesn't indicate that it failed. And so we were thinking about ways to improve that. I think one thing I brought up was maybe kind of tying the bundle's status to the installed status during the bundle instance resolution. I think another option that Tim was bringing up was doing a more numeric approach, where in that situation that we're talking about, it would display a 1 out of 2 available. And then that would indicate that something is kind of amiss there. I'm good with really anything. I think that I have some code working locally. It's just a matter of kind of how we want to move forward with this.
Yeah, I like the numerical approach. I think there's definitely a lot of precedent for that kind of thing in Kube. I wonder what would we want to do 1 of 2 or 0 of 1? I guess the existing one isn't necessarily in a failed state until the pivot goes through.
So when the pivot occurs, the old state is still around. It
Right.
doesn't delete the old state. So in that particular instance, it is kind of misleading, right? I think 0 of 1 might make sense. As long as the documentation says, like, if it's 0 out of 1 and a pivot occurred, then that likely means that the old stuff is still around.
I kind of imagine that it might end up being multiple columns or multiple stats of some kind. Like one is probably like, are we healthy right now? And the other is, are we pivoting right now? And so there's like different things that the reconciler is doing and maybe like different ways to represent the various aspects of it. The other thing that totally comes to mind here also is like right now we're using Helm under the hood that like kind of tries to do an atomic update and like do a rollback if something doesn't look right. And I think Nick has brought up some reasons why that's not always great, and there's trade-offs that are made, you know, depending on what you're trying to do. So we have to also keep in mind that a different provisioner, and it might even be that we change the plain provisioner, but it might be that like we need this thing to be generic enough such that like depending on your strategy for doing rollouts, like it makes sense for different strategies that way too. So I think we need to be like ultra, unfortunately, what I think that means is like we can't be like super descriptive in the column output. And like we're going to probably basically say like if you're a provisioner, you go put a bunch of comments in your conditions that you write in the messages that tell people what's going on. That's provisioner specific, but otherwise like what we're going to put in the column output is going to be pretty coarse grained probably. So in my mind, it's just a matter of like, yeah, it's going to be coarse grained, but can we make it clear enough what's going on? Like, is a pivot happening? And like, do we have a bundle or something? I don't know.
I think one thing when I was kind of messing around with this locally was keeping the string status, but when a pivot occurs and it fails, it says pivot failed. And then that's the only change here. So like, I think that might help with a little bit of the opaque nature, but I think in general, the numeric approach at least hints to something being kind of off. If it says 1 out of 2, you'd expect it to just be 1 of 1, right? So I think ideally I would go with that, but I see all of the points that you're saying there. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Joe.
Yeah, I kind of feel like 1 of 2 is misleading because it almost sounds like we're trying to get to 2, but really we're trying to get that 2 back down to a 1. This is probably something we'll just have to iterate on. We'll probably need like a whole separate meeting and maybe even a doc to walk through the different examples and alternatives just to get us all on the same page.
Yeah, this is almost like you need two separate fields. One is like old, like out of date stuff that's not the latest thing that we want, and then like as a count, and then the next one is like things that we want, number of things that we want count, you know what I mean, or
yeah,
etc.
Like previous
like
version 1,
desire.
new version 0 of 1.
Yeah,
that gets weird then when the new version and the previous version, like when you're not pivoting, then it gets weird because you're like, well, what is the previous and what is the new? Like that so then it doesn't make sense in that case. That's where I think this is the most difficult. It's like trying to code both.
Well, I think there's only a concept of current and then everything else, right? Like the target and everything else. And I think we don't really even need to think about them in like a linear direction. There's a partial order, not an absolute order, right?
Well, Nick, to your question about rollbacks, like if a provisioner is doing rollbacks, then the desired state is still to like roll to the next thing, but like we haven't been successful doing that. So like we have to keep rolling back as we retry. So in that case, like I think that's basically the same thing as the pivot is failing and we've not had a successful pivot.
That's almost, to me, a DEPI problem, because the thing that understands the absolute ordering, right, is probably a level up. But I think I'll just try to type this out long form on the issue.
Yeah, I think the only thing that is at the Refactor layer is that like in a bundle instance, there's really only ever 2 bundles that come into play at any given time. There's the what's active because we were successful at some point and what we're trying to get to. And like nothing else, like anything that happened before that or after that, like nothing else matters. It's literally just those two things. And on the very first install, like there's nothing in the past. So like it's only what you're trying to do for the current thing. But then beyond that, it's always just like what was previously successful and now what we're trying to do. And if you change your desired state while things are failing, like that still means your previous thing was successful at some point. And now we're just trying to go to a different direction. But
there's so many worms in that can, like how,
I agree.
like, I mean, it's questionable whether, you know, that should be exposed at all, because we can't make the claim, like we can't be axiomatic about that everything, you can always go backwards. Like it's like you break a vase, right? So I've broken the vase and now putting the vase back together is probably impossible.
Yeah. No, I agree. So yeah, maybe in that case, like once you start pivoting, you can't make any claims about whatever has been. Or at least like, that's the thing, like some provisioners might be able to say like, yeah, or not, maybe not say, but some provisioners may be able to implement a rollback thing where, you know, for whatever reason, they decided that was the thing that was okay. But it just may be that the bundle instance API isn't a place where they can like have a specific field that talks about that concept. Yeah.
Right, because that would at least catch a case where people don't want to install Deppy. But this is such an aside. I do wonder if it's worth renaming that installed bundle name field. Because I think Nick made that comment in the chat. It's kind of misleading when we talk about bundles being activated by bundle instances.
Yeah, I would say for sure.
Yeah.
We can remove that.
And that's certainly a good first issue right there.
Nice. Yeah. So we should definitely capture that, renaming the
I think we could,
field. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, maybe what we could do is basically say like one column field is desired bundle name or whatever. And the other column field is like, have I successfully progressed to that bundle?
Can that just be a condition?
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as we're able to, it'd be nice if we could somehow expose that as printer column. So as long as we can write a JSON path printer column thing that gives us the ability to put that in a printer column, then absolutely. I think we can. At least for the is this thing active or not condition. What the name of it is, maybe you need a separate field for it. Or I guess you just look at the spec.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, Tyler, I feel like we probably need to, we definitely had like quite a long conversation about this already, but I'm not sure. Do you feel like this is still something that we want to try to deliver in 0.5, or do we need to look at this more?
I think we want to deliver in 0.5. That being said, I think that it's still a little bit unclear on the path forward. So that kind of makes me lean towards saying to get it into 0.6. But I think that no matter what, it's definitely a problem that at least we have thoughts on. So that's good news. I think it's just a matter of kind of like the philosophy of, I guess, the relationship between a bundle and a bundle instance. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. We can talk about this in the Ruckpack channel upstream, I guess, to kind of come to some kind of consensus. And then the majority of this ticket is just going to be, what do we want to do? And then implementation is pretty trivial.
Okay. Okay, cool. So how about then, if you sound confident, then let's leave it in the curl milestone. Take the conversation upstream. and see what we can get in. That sounds good. Okay. So next up, add pprof profiling to the plane provisioner. I see this is assigned to Catherine. I know we had some conversations about this internally, which were a while back. Catherine, did you get a chance to start on this, or you're working on the DEPI stuff?
No, I've just been working on the DEPI stuff.
Okay, I think like this is a good backlog candidate for now because it's not really on the critical path, unless someone feels otherwise. We can just go ahead and we can just go ahead and move this to the backlog. Oh. Okay. Cool. Next, source private Git bundle.
Yes.
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have PR for this, but that code is against before the refactor using the Go library. So this PR, probably that PR will be trashed. Then I can quickly add the same functionality to after the refactor code. But anyway, that first the PR must be in to make that make this progress.
Okay. Does it make sense to maybe have this go in 0.6 in that case?
Probably, yeah. It's very quick, but I think anyway it takes some time for review. So yeah. 0.6 may make sense.
Okay, great. Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and push this back. Yes, revisit opt-out design for CRD validated webhook. This is basically something that came out of conversation around the viability of the CRD validation webhook that we currently implemented in Rugpack. It seemed like there wasn't that much interest upstream, and for some reason it was brought up that we should maybe not have it implemented altogether. I can't quite recall the context. But basically,
it was as a webhook, right, Dan? We should be implementing in code path because upstream wants to move away from validating webhooks. But
Right.
It's the possibility we'll time out if the implementation isn't within a couple seconds. So whether or not a webhook is the right mechanism for these checks is another case, right? If there's no value to upstream KK, right?
Yeah, I think that was also like part of the question about like, should this webhook be opt-in or opt-out for Rugback? And like, given OLM's history of like trying to push like, oh, we think like there should be tenancy in this way, and then upstream like never adopted it, that kind of screwed us. So I wonder if we should kind of go the opposite direction now, which is like, we're just going to do everything that upstream does, but if you want extra stuff, then you can opt into it. But by default, like, we're just going to give you what upstream gives you.
Yeah, I just kind of worry about the UX there, Joe, around requiring. So let's say it's an annotation that drives this. I do worry about every bundle author or operator author having to inject this unless we have some magic way of doing it in downstream environments. But maybe this is something we can revisit long term anyways. It just seems like it's part of the core value proposition of these like entry Rugback provisioners right now. But certainly can understand that we should be less opinionated perspective, right?
Yeah, I think we would have made the similar argument about OLM's tenancy you know, 2 or 3 years ago, whenever it was, like, oh, that's the core value prop to let us do this, and then it's like, well, it just doesn't work. So yeah, I'm a little gun shy.
I think it should probably be opt in, and like you could imagine that you can imagine this validator just being another Refactor bundle that gets installed if you want it to run on the cluster, right? Completely separate thing. You just install it if you want it installed. And if you don't want it installed, then you don't install it. And then it has its own you know, hooks and stuff that other people can do. So I think it's already pretty much designed for that right now. The only difference is we're installing it by default, right?
Yeah, I think it just goes in. Yeah, I can buy that perspective, Nick. I think we don't have to go down this lane too much, but in terms of like, well, as a cluster admin, I want to have this be the default, or maybe it's from just the API perspective. Like I want this to be present for all bundles or bundle instances that get provisioned, versus I want to be able to have some sort of escape hatch for this specific bundle instance. I don't know where the granularity lies.
Take the validation. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, that's maybe an argument for like thinking about this from like a Kube-native API perspective. Like maybe rather than an annotation on a CRD that we expect to be already present in the bundle, maybe we don't ask CRDs to do anything, but we have a separate API that basically selects over those CRDs. And then the controller for this, like the webhook that runs if we still have a webhook, then looks at that API and says like, oh, okay, I see that this CRD matches the selector defined in your cluster-wide API, so then I'll validate it. And then if you don't want to do that anymore, then you just change your object of that API and you no longer select that CRD. So it's kind of handled separately from a CRD validation. It's like on the side, that it's kind of like a label selector kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that solves my UX concerns.
So there's two things here. One is we've already factored out the validation, which is nice. It means we can deliver it independently from Refactor, and it's not dependent on it, and everything just works perfectly and beautifully. And the other one is just we want to change the API for that toy validator, so that, like, you know, a bundle doesn't require it, doesn't require knowledge of it in advance to opt out. Like a user can opt out on the other side. And I think we could also just add to the API, right? You could potentially add what Joe has, or Joe was talking about, like a new API, but also leave in the annotation capability so that bundles that do know about it can opt out, and admins can enforce this on bundles without the bundles having to know. And then also probably block bundles from opting out if they want to be harsh.
Yeah, the only other thing I would say is I still think this should be opt-in. Like I think by default, even if you have this thing installed, there should have to be something that says like, please validate me, either as an annotation or in this other API. That way, like there's no chance of a CRD like failing this validation without someone having done something to make sure that that happens.
That, yeah, I don't necessarily have problems with that. I would really like to do what we did with combo and move this into its own plain V1 bundle, maybe even in a different repository, and then just have it be like have a bundle instance dropped in the default install for Ruckpack, so that like the first thing it does when it wakes up is boom, install this thing, bootstrap it.
Yeah, it sounds like that's the solution that we're happy
That
with.
almost sounds like a distribution of Ruckback at that point, right? Like, oh, you want the one that comes with the
Yep.
CRD validator, like take this one. But yeah, I think that makes the most sense.
Yeah, I mean, like it doesn't even need to be, and we don't even need to like do a custom thing for it. We could even just have like install instructions that have a YAML in it that you copy and paste and does a kubectl command that creates the bundle instance. Like, hey, do you want this extra validation? Boom.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's where Joe and I were talking about the Helm chart direction, and maybe it's not as valuable now if like, well, you don't really need a templating layer just to optionally create a bundle instance or not. That's just an aside. So it sounds like we're saying like we do want a bi-directional approach. If it is opt-in, we might need an API such that a cluster admin or some sort of admin's able to enforce it from a granularity perspective without relying on annotations that may or may not be present.
So I was hoping I could get some clarification real quick before we move off of this. It sounds like there are a couple of things at play here. And I think the number one thing is that upstream doesn't seem to have a need for this. So my question would then be, what is the use of it even being in a webhook now, if there's not much desire for it to exist outside of Ruckpack? And then I guess the question behind the question is, why does it not make sense to then create a property on a bundle that says validate or don't validate me?
Why do you think this is not valid outside of just because it doesn't exist?
Valid in the sense that I think that there are some performance concerns when it comes to the CRD validator that Ben has been bringing up. And I was talking about this with Kevin kind of offline. So we can talk about it. I don't want to keep this too much longer if we have other things to get to. But the general premise is if we have a CRD that has 10,000 CRs, there might be a performance concern there. And when we presented this to upstream consumers, there wasn't much interest in it. So that's where the not a lot of interest has come from.
I thought this was supposed to be for validating the changes in the schema between the CRDs that are successively applied to a cluster. So like if I apply a CRD, I want to make sure that the schema doesn't break any of the existing CRs as well. Yeah, I guess.
Right, and it
Yes, the
has to
existing
query
CRs.
the existing CRs to do that. And that's fine normally, right? But the only problem is it has to return within a set amount of time.
I feel like it would have to be pretty large. Like say there were 10,000 CRs. Ideally, you've cached all of those locally, which maybe has its own problems with memory. But if you have cached them all locally and you don't have those memory problems, if your code is so slow that it can't go over 10,000 instances of this thing, like within a few milliseconds, like something's wrong still, I think.
Yeah, and I agree with you, right? I wonder how much value we have in having this in a webhook, given the added complexity. And I think to your point, Joe, like we could probably do some stuff that optimizes this to be a lot faster. And we haven't even done that performance testing yet. So it's like premature optimization to that degree. I'm just wondering, I'm kind of questioning the efficacy of a webhook implementation.
Well, I think
just doing this in the controller.
I would probably stick with the webhook because we've got it. And like, if we think that that's not going to work long term, then let's factor out the bits that the webhook runs into the library. And then if we need to run that library as part of a control loop rather than a webhook, then it's really easy then to just call that library in a different way.
Right.
I think it's like we're bringing in
And look, if we all want to go with the webhook, like I'm totally fine with it. I'm not going to block it. I was just bringing that question up to make sure that we talked about it.
I mean, it's that I'm not sure why folks don't really see the value of having Cube not destroy things when you're updating them and causing like crazy problems, validations. Like this is something that Cube should probably be doing by default, right?
It's sort of like they are going to do something different that solves a similar problem, but it seems like not all the problems are solved with what they're going to do with schema ratcheting. So I don't know. In my mind, like, yeah, thanks for my response would be like, okay, yeah, thanks for the reminder about how fast a webhook has to return. We'll keep that in mind. But like that's not enough to make me say like, oh, we have to throw the webhook implementation away.
Yeah. If anything, like this seems like a provider class type thing. And I almost wonder if there's a slot in this for every, not on a per bundle basis, but like for every provider to like be able to use a quote unquote webhook, just, you know, effectively that library that you're talking about, that abstraction, without it being on a individual bundle level, just like another general layer that you pass through right before you apply. So that, yeah, I digress, sorry.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, Nick. So do we feel like with this one, we have enough clarity to move it through in 0.5? It seems like there was a lot of back and forth. Could we do something small for 0.5 with this, where we just make it opt-in instead of opt-out and leave everything else as it is? Or
Yeah, I wouldn't expect the API to be introduced immediately, right? As long as we track the want or need long-term to have an API that sits in front of this, then I'm cool with delivering this in chunks, right? And it sounds like we have an interest in making this opt-in rather than the current opt-out.
yeah, I think so. So like the long-term solution would be, you know, potentially have an API.
But yeah, it would be a bi-directional. I have a potential CRD annotation on top of, or sorry, a bundle CRD annotation, a bundle level CRD annotation on top of a first-class API.
The one thing I worry about if we separate this out and make it an annotation somewhere is that you don't know if that controller is running when you add that annotation to your thing, and you might make some assumptions that it's always running when it's not necessarily going to. So if we just say like there is no annotation at all, the only way to make it happen, to opt in, is to use this API. And then if that API is present, then you can have a lot more confidence that there's a controller behind it that's making sure the webhook is doing its thing.
So what's your suggestion about the, like, are you suggesting that the provisioner has knowledge about the webhook API?
No, I'm suggesting that if you're a bundle and you want to opt into this, then you would drop a object into your bundle that says, please select my CRD, right? And then if that controller, if the API that controlled the webhook validation wasn't present, then you'd fail to install the bundle because that thing's not present on your cluster.
Yeah, I mean, it's like one of those things, like you never, in what reality do you not want to have like the thing not ratchet? And it's almost to me like the problem of determining whether a dependency exists is really at the DEPI level. And so like the bundle would have a property that say, I depend on this package being installed along with me. So by the time it gets to bundle install, yeah, I guess there's ordering concerns there too.
Well, yeah, I think you're hitting my point, which is that like, if you declare that you want this validation and you do that by saying like, make sure this instance of this API exists on the cluster, and then Ruckpack goes and tries to install it and says like, hey, that API doesn't exist, That's basically acknowledgement that your intent can't be met by that cluster. So like, we're just going to throw our hands up and say like, sorry, like can't do that, rather than, okay, yeah, we'll install it, but then you're not going to get the validation that you're looking for. And we're in a silent, it's like silent.
Yeah, you need the you also have an ordering problem there too, right? You have to make sure that that object or that resource is applied before the CRDs.
Well, the good thing is like this only really ever matters on CRD upgrade. So you'd have an ordering problem if you introduce that object later in a future version of your bundle, but you wouldn't have that problem if it was in the very first version of your bundle that you installed.
Yeah. I guess I should clarify to people who are like here and maybe wondering why I keep blathering on about this. I think one of like the first principle, I guess, is that it'd be nice if Ruckback could be super agnostic of like broader semantics of changes in APIs and like not have to codify any of that logic across multiple provisioners. And if like that could just be something that Cube handles, which it should do. So that's why I think it's important, and that's why we are having such a big conversation about it, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Totally. So folks, we're out of time for today. I think this was a really productive issue triage meeting. Definitely a lot of great conversations. So I was really happy to hear it. And as we, get DEPI online and do some more stuff in maybe in the FBC land, we can have those conversations here as well. So with that, I think we'll close the meeting for today. Thank you all for attending, and we'll have the working group meeting next week. See you, everyone.